time for another DraftScience video presentation. So we'll do comments a little, mostly on some other video. Yeah, mostly. So this is sort of just a reply to Franklin who I have attempted to engage in some sort of interaction, but it's just so difficult to get this to happen with people. I did invite him to a Skype, and I didn't get any reply. He apparently doesn't read comments on his own videos, so I don't know. It's just, video responses works on YouTube, and apparently nobody is capable of that. So, which is kind of bizarre. I mean, I prefer it over live conversation, frankly. Is that you make a video, explain something, and then somebody else makes a video and explains why that's not true. I mean, isn't that the rational way to do things? Seems to me it's more efficient, it gets to the point, waste time with a bunch of distractions. So anyway, I'll play some of, I was a little disappointed in some of Franklin's commentary. He doesn't really know me that well, and he really has no right to make me into something or someone or whatever. I mean, he really has some obligation, if you're going to talk about somebody, to know who you're talking about. I don't think he's watched much of my video content because he frankly couldn't describe it so poorly if he had. I, on the other hand, have attempted to read his papers and to find whatever I could find where he's making some sort of argument, and consume as much as possible. Just like the case of the D. Hillsters, I've watched many more hours of his content than he has watched minutes of my content. And so it doesn't provide much opportunity for any kind of interaction. But yes, the failure of the internet to provide this function, you could go back 10 years and people got the idea, and they only could understand video responses when YouTube had a category called responses. I don't really understand. Because YouTube takes away the feature of profiling responses as part of the video, somehow nobody knows how to make one anymore. It is just kind of strange. But anyway, so the only response videos, the trolls make videos, and they make videos of quote mining my content, and what are you going to do? They clips, they sit there and just basically say, let's find the worst argument he made and argue that, instead of finding the best argument I made and arguing that. And it's so obvious. So, what value does that have? I mean, it's a very dishonest way of interacting on the internet. But anyway, so people are dishonest. Yeah, shit. That's news right now. That's old news. People suck, unfortunately. I mean, people can keep talking about how, human beings are doing all this stuff and their singularities and all that crap, but I wouldn't go to a heaven that had people in it. Fuck it. They suck. Alright, generally speaking, just, opportunistic, selfish bags of shit. With very little, I mean, they will steal candy from a baby if they're pretty sure there's no cameras running. But anyway, I really don't need that. So we'll start here. Okay. So I'll play some of Franklin first, then read, the trolls, just spam the chat, and Franklin being, sort of clueless. I mean, this does bring up another subject, just a background, proving that I have watched a lot of D. Hillster and a lot of all of their videos. Frankly, I've watched all of them. They had a whole argument about trolls and, how much trouble they cause. And D. Hillster finds them really quite obnoxious, and Franklin just couldn't care less. And, so Franklin is sort of going to prove how he's being a bit naive by not understanding that a troll shows up and just changes the whole agenda of the conversation. And it becomes a conversation based on a bunch of false premises. And what value is there in that? Oh, that's right, no value. So, anyway. So let's play some of this.
But he says that he was going to perform a light bending experiment, but he never did because he chickened out, or maybe because it's very difficult to do these experiments, or maybe because it's not right. I have no idea what he's going to propose.
That's not working. YouTube is cool. You know, it's such a great. It just it just works so well. What the hell was that? Now the chat's gone, which I'll need later. So let's see if we can get that to show up. Ugh, fuck.
Find the stars and all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm just kind of guessing. But that's more consistent with the idea that light is traveling as a wave, and that what happens when light is bending around these gigantic stars, what you're seeing is actually a refraction effect. That the density of the medium increases around the stars, and it's just like the thick part of a lens, and the light bends when it hits that boundary.
So he's basically making both arguments. I mean, one minute he's saying, you know, it's his images, and then he starts describing scatter, because he starts describing the fact that around stars you have a whole bunch of junk, fog, and that fog scatters light. So the two subjects have to be understood, that the whole point is try to find a distinction. How can you tell the difference between scatter and light that was bent by gravity? Can we see the difference? Is there something about the light that hits us that would tell us it's not scatter? I would argue there isn't, and that the images, what they are images, they're not really images. Again, they're not like they took a click camera, that's all done. The images from the Hubble telescope are highly processed, and there are aberrations that just can't be explained, in the sense that they have a piece of lensing that goes this way, and then there's another piece going this way, and they're identical. That seems pretty obvious that nature didn't produce that kind of result.
And that is what causes the light bending. So I would say that that is more consistent with the idea that there's a medium and that there's a light wave.
All right, so I'm just going to bring up the Joker comment. I mean, you know, I can do this whenever I feel like it, so I will, just because he sort of mentioned the light bending experiment, and that's in the Joker's, one of his little jackass commentaries, that there's some experiment. All right, so me and Piero had a conversation about ways of detecting this relativity thing. And let's understand, Einstein basically believed, okay, in the sense that Einstein's thought experiment is you take a spaceship, you can see this, right? And you shoot light across the spaceship. The idea would be, you know, that the light travels straight and the surface of the ship moves. And so if I had a target here, the light can't hit the target because the target moves from this position for the time I launch the light to this position. And so it will appear, if I'm in the spaceship, you know, and I'm looking at this, okay, that the light bent because it's not going to hit the side of the ship where it's supposed to. Now, I won't see this bending necessarily, because what it'll basically, the light will, if I could see it, what I'll see is light doing this kind of thing. You know, it's still moving straight, it's just being changed in its location where it's going to end up a little bit. But the idea is the light moves straight. That's Einstein's point. Okay, and the ship moves away from it, and that's what creates the appearance of bending, right? So Einstein understood the principle fine. He didn't say the light goes forward to hit the spot. No, he said it won't hit the spot. It will appear to have bent, which in a sense creates a little speedometer that makes it possible for you to see exactly how fast the ship is going. But Einstein was so certain of this effect that he decided to make light bend twice as much in gravity, so he could explain the you know, why the elevator thing would be the same on Earth. So he, you know, made light bend on Earth likewise. So, you know, there's they're contending, okay, it's their contention that somehow light does in fact not bend or not go straight. That somehow the light going to the target will somehow hit the target up here, so that somehow the light knows to go ahead and hit the target. So the simple light experiment that was, you know, you could do, a laser experiment, is, let's say here's the ideally, this is how you would do it. If we had a flat Earth, okay, so this is the flat side of the Earth, and I could stand at one end of the Earth, and I could shoot a laser, and I could be way over here, thousands of miles away. The point is the whole Earth is traveling in directions. It's circling the sun. It's going through the Milky Way, and so it's got all kinds of motion built into it. And the fact is when the light leaves, it's going somewhere. And by the time it gets to where it's going, the thing it was going towards is now going to be in some other position. And that would be detectable. So at one point in the day, you could see that the light hits here, and later in the day, it'll hit something else, some other thing. You know, the target will move, is the point. And although the effect is tiny when you're just going, say, a mile, if you don't go that much, you're talking about like a millimeter or less change. So there's theoretically, this is an experiment that might be capable, you might be capable of doing. Now, certainly the LIGO people could probably do something a little better than me or Piro could do. Now, Piro has the ideal conditions, where ideal in the sense that from the perspective of doing the experiment without much equipment. So, I mean, I obviously lived in a place full of trees, okay, and woods. And so I had to do the experiment where I'd, put a mirror on a tree far away, and it had to be a tree. There were no other trees in the way, or no bushes and all that stuff. And I actually went to the trouble of taking out some bushes and taking out some stuff that were in the way. But anyway, but Piro lived on a lake, and he could put a mirror on one side of the lake, shine a laser to the mirror, reflect it back, and see if at 12 noon how it hit the target, how the laser hit the target. And then see that if, like, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it had moved over here because the Earth had changed its position relative to the emitter. In the terms of the emitter and the surface of the Earth had changed its position, so you couldn't be aimed at the same things because your position in space was changed relative to your motion. Gets a little bit complicated. But anyway, I mean, obviously he has the better conditions because across the lake he doesn't have to worry about any trees. But anyway, so it would have been better if he did the experiment, frankly, than me trying to do it. Now, the problem was kind of something, somebody with some experience with lasers would certainly understand. Stop that, please. I don't really have time for this nonsense right now. Gotta put a new cord on this speaker. Well, I just ought to put I have another set of speakers. I just ought to plug those in. Anyway, so much to do. Alright, so anyway, doing the experiment, what you find is that lasers really do spread. Okay, so as much as they bullshit about laser beams, the laser gets bigger and bigger. So what I was finding when it was hitting, by the time, it's a little spot if I hit it on the wall. But shooting it to the tree, I was already getting a spot that was like that size. So, how are you going to detect a millimeter inside of that? And this is where you have to detect it, is all this fuzzy stuff. And the fuzzy part is getting bigger and bigger as the laser spot gets bigger and bigger. And then obviously when I take the reflection and take it back again, that spot's going to be even bigger. And so, yeah, it was hopeless that was going to work. So, even though I had a pretty good quality laser, it's not good enough because it has too much divergence in it. The other problem is that, a laser traveling through atmosphere is going through a lot of molecules. So even though the atmosphere isn't very thick with molecules, they are there, and they are, generally speaking, transmitters. They're all transparent gases. So, but even transmitting through a transparent, element, you're going to get some scatter, and it's, that's not helping you at all either. So that doesn't help. Since I'm on the subject, another one of the stupid jokers' comments is about the moon and the little tiny reflector that's on the moon. And he doesn't even understand how that experiment's done. So a telescope on Earth shoots a laser at the moon to hit a little reflector and get a photon back. And they literally are just getting a photon back. They get very little light back. The truth is the laser hits, it's not a square mile, but the laser hits an area that's huge, okay, gigantic, hundreds of meters across, let's just say. So the spot the laser makes on the moon is gigantic, okay, and only 1 in a billion photons, or 1 in a trillion of the ones they send actually hit the reflector. So it's a tiny, tiny percentage of the light they get back. But all they need is 1, because this is at a frequency, and they can tell because they'll get back their single photons at a frequency. And so they'll know the signal they sent reflected off the reflector, and they got back a little tiny bit. But it's literally, to make a comparison, it's a refrigerator, and one little refrigerator magnet is the reflector. That's how much light they're hitting on the surface of the moon. So they're not really hitting the target at all. They're just hitting in the vicinity of the target. So obviously you couldn't tell, 2 feet of difference in this laser beam based on the movement of the moon or something. Not going to help you any. So anyway, their theory is that light doesn't travel in straight lines. They think light has 2 momentums. Is what it comes down to. They think, if I have something that's producing light and I can move it half the speed of light, their theory is that the light will come out this way. Because this is moving, the light will go the speed of light in this direction, and it'll go half the speed of light in this direction. So it'll have 2 velocities. I say that's nonsense. I think Einstein says that's nonsense. That's not what light does. Photons are released, like releasing a bird or something. They, opening the cage and just letting it fly out of your car. The bird is already flying. The photon's already moving the speed of light, and you just release it. And it's going to just keep going in a straight line. It is not going to go to the future, okay? And it doesn't go to the past. You can move a target anywhere you want over here. The light did this, and that's consistent with Einstein's theory. So anyway, just for clarification. So I did attempt to do the experiment. I just found it wasn't going to be possible in the location I lived. I couldn't get enough distance, and I didn't have a spot that was good enough to detect a tiny amount of difference in the motion between when the photon was emitted and when it was received. How much this tree moved, okay, was not going to be practically detectable. And again, this is based on more than one motion. Again, where the surface of the Earth is rotating, and then the Earth is moving, and then the solar system is moving, and the galaxy is moving, and all of these motions are built into our motion at any one moment. A piece of us is moving in all of these directions, and the net product is where we travel. We travel the net motion of our little bits over time. What does it all add up to? Just as right now in gravity is pushing some of my pieces down. I can detect that because they're hitting the ground or the seat, and they're pushing back, and I can feel that. So at any one moment, some of my pieces are moving down, and some of them are moving up. At any one moment, different pieces are doing that. They're always exchanging that motion. They're jiggling me on top of the Earth. I'm bouncing in the acceleration down from gravity and the acceleration up from the pressure of the Earth. And it's just a fact that there's a net that is, I just sit here in one place, but that's the net motion. My real motion is a lot more complicated. The real motion of the stuff inside of me. So they apparently don't believe that. They don't believe that there's any such thing. They call it the God space or something. They don't believe that there's actually something in the universe that's not moving, and that everything else is, in a moving state, some sort of state of motion. So they really think that everything is somehow moving because there's no absolute frame you could compare anything to. There's nothing in the universe that has no motion. They don't believe that's possible. It's not possible for some electron to actually be in one position and just maybe move to here and then move to here and then move to here and then move to here, but just stay in that one little spot in space. They don't think that's possible. Everything has to be going some percentage of the speed of light. Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's silly to make that declaration based on the evidence that exists. Bold talk from brainless fat turds. To use a John Wayne quote. Well, a quote from a John Wayne movie. In honor of the cowboy.
But he says that he was going to perform a light bending experiment, but he never did because he chickened out, or maybe because it's very difficult to do these experiments, or maybe because it's not.
Yeah, so Franklin's adding that part. But anyway, he doesn't really know that much about it, so it's a little too fast, so I will less speed and more volume, I guess.
Right. I have no idea what he's going to propose, but like I said, if he thinks it's strictly a particle like an electron,
I think it's strictly a composite. That's why I put composite in the title of the video. So there's a video explaining what a photon is, and it calls it a composite. It's not one thing. It's made of something.
And although there is this interesting thing that, you think electrons should also drop at 9.8 meters per second. Strangely enough, so there's very little actual experimental evidence on this, but from the people at Stanford Linear Accelerator, where they're shooting electrons across 5 miles, I think as near as they can tell.
Okay, they can't tell. So this is a place where you can sort of intuitively understand that there's no way they could see that because they're pumping so much energy into the electron. There's no way that gravity would have any influence at all because they got all these magnetic fields controlling exactly where the path of the electrons are. So they're controlling mechanisms for controlling where the charge they're using to control where the electrons move has clearly way overcome, 1 times 10 to the 40th difference in the intensity, the strength of the two forces. I mean, it's a huge difference. A tiny voltage has so much more power to move an electron than gravity. I mean, we're talking billions of times stronger. I mean, billions of times stronger.
Gravity has no effect on electrons. It doesn't actually drag them down. If it did, they'd have to compensate for that, but they don't.
So that's just silly. I'm just saying it's silly to think you have to compensate for, say, if I had 1 volt. I am now already a billion times more influence on an electron than gravity could have. So, I mean, how could I possibly be worried about what gravity's doing when I'm already applying a force that's a billion times stronger?
Individual electrons may be immune to gravity. But,
Well, then individual atoms would never go anywhere. So, I mean, the whole thing, you can't make the elemental bits immune to the force that's moving atoms unless you create a structure for atoms that's made out of some kind of new wooey stuff that, your Higgs bosons or something. So unless you're willing to say that gravity isn't elemental in the form that we know the elements to be, which are electrons and protons, but I don't think there's any evidence to demonstrate any reason to worry about it. Electrons are affected by gravity. It's just that the effect on an electron as a very small object is obviously a tiny amount of force, and any force you're applying, just having a tissue in the same room as the electron, I mean, I could put a tissue over here and have an electron over here. The effect of the charge on that tissue is going to be so much stronger as an influence on the electron than gravity.
For the fact that neutrons are not immune to gravity. I mean, definitely you can send out a neutron, it will fall and it will bounce, and it bounces in a quantized manner. It can't bounce up at some arbitrary.
So again, this is another experiment where you're paraphrasing an experiment, and you're telling me that you can do this with a neutron, and I would argue first off that you can't even do that. this whole idea of, this notion that they can separate electrons and protons and neutrons when they're using exactly the same gun to produce all three of them, seems a little bit, they're just making that part up. They hope it's electrons. They're pretty sure, maybe, possibly, but you don't know what you're getting. You can move a charged ion and it'll look a lot like it was an electron or a proton. You can't really tell an ion's movement in a charge field from an electron or a proton.
It has to come bounce up at only certain fixed distances. But it definitely drops in the presence of gravity, as opposed to electrons.
Okay, this wasn't exactly the part I thought we would get to, but whatever, we'll play this anyway. It's not going to kill you.
Which may not drop in the presence of gravity. And that may be because gravity is created by dipole forces, and you must be a dipole in order to feel the effect of gravity.
Yeah, well, it says you on that one too. So again, that's just, I don't see any way to make gravity polar. It just couldn't care less, So it doesn't have any electric or magnetic appearance to it at all. It's clearly just an attractive force. Yeah, so since we're on the subject of gravity, I'll do my little quick gravity spiel. I wanted to try some new way of doing videos, so I'll do this now since I'm here. Alright, so I just drew the example, the simple way of understanding gravity, and so we'll just play this video, and hopefully that can be done with the spacebar. And it can. Great. So we have an object. Object could be anything, could be electron, let's say. Okay, let's say it's an electron. And it's going to get hit by a piece of force. So it's minding its own business. At the current moment, it has no momentum. And a bit of force hits it, so a piece of a photon. Not a whole photon, just one little piece of a photon hits it. And it sticks. It's stuck, okay? It hit it and it's stuck. So you could think of the electron as jello if you want to. And the bullet goes out, or some sort of gel. And the bullet goes in, but the bullet can't get through the gel. It slows it down. So the whole gel collects the momentum of the little bit. You can think of it that way if you'd like. But it doesn't matter. It sticks. So now the energy of the quanta of energy that was in the photon, one little bit of its momentum, is now hit an electron and is now moving the electron. There's the new location it moved it to. And it moved it to another location. And this whole time it's been able to move it to another location because nothing else is hitting it at the moment. So the universe has got a bunch of little photons, little pieces of energy coming at it from all directions all the time. But at this little speck of time, nothing's hit it, except the one thing stuck to it. So that's just to point out that the original piece of force was moving at the speed of force, speed of light, right? Should be called the speed of force. Does anybody have a counter argument to that simple point? That it would be much clearer if physics described the fundamental forces by understanding they all have something in common, they all move the speed of force, the speed of light, and that it should be called the speed of force. And then you'd understand that light is a force. Alright, so now I'm saying that now, okay, the electron is moving less than the speed of light. So the force hits it, but the electron is causing some retardation because it's big and it's a bubble or whatever it is. And it can't move the speed of force. So the little bit of force hits it and it moves something less than. Could be twice this, could be half the speed of light, it could be 3/4 of the speed of light, could be 99% of the speed of light. It really doesn't, it's sort of arbitrary. One truth is the truth. The truth is there is a certain degrade in the speed, and that's all you need. It's something less than the speed of light when it's stuck on an electron. So I'm just saying that whole motion now, so that whole part of time, right? The thing was moving, it was going to get at a certain place at a certain time. It's not going to get there on time now because it got stuck moving a piece of matter, and it's been slowed down in its total path. Alright, so now another piece of force is now going to hit the electron. So the electron's moving, something less than the speed of light, and now another piece of force hits it. Now that line means it now the matter stops. Okay, an opposite force, a force anyway, has hit, and now there's a bit stuck over here, and another bit's coming, and now the two bits are basically going to do what you'd expect from a kinetic system. They're both going to reflect. And the electron is going to stop moving. And so now we have the reflections, and now it's back to where it was at the very beginning. Nothing. Okay. So reflection, I wrote the word for no good reason. I really have noticed that. I really hate that about lecture videos. But you watch some lectures and the guy's just writing crap on the board that he already said, and it's like, what a waste of time. I mean, when you add up how much of the lecture is just ruined because the guy's writing paragraphs of text on the board that he already spoke, that somebody could make their notes without seeing it written. It's just terribly inefficient. You'd think scientists would notice that. So I'm emphasizing reflection, and now there's no motion, okay, in the electron. So the electron was stationary. A bit hits it, it moves where that bit tells it to go. Then it gets hit by another bit, and both of them reflect. And now the thing is stationary again. And then a new bit will hit it, and then it'll start moving in that direction. And then, so this is a way to understand the kinetics of the interaction between matter and force. And using this model, you can clearly understand that, oh, now I understand where gravity comes from. Because gravity just means that when you move a piece of matter, an electron, you absorbed energy from the universe. Because the amount of the amount of movement of the energy has now been changed. The distance it travels in a moment of time has changed by moving the matter. So you took some energy out of the system. The system, if I have a bunch of matter bits, a bunch of electrons in this little clump, the fact is, if they're moving, jiggling, and they're jiggling in all kinds of, every one of them's jiggling in a different direction, you could understand that the equilibrium of this system now means that more energy went in, okay, little bits flew in, they got slowed down, they didn't cover as much distance as they should have, and then when they leave, they've left behind a certain amount of energy because now they're behind. If you're slowed down in what you're going to get done, that's the same thing as losing energy. So that explains what gravity is. Gravity just means as soon as I have matter that's moving, little electrons and protons, they've absorbed energy from the universe to move, and that absorption will be felt by anything on the outside looking in, because the universe where there are no electrons and protons, over here, is going to have more energy in it than the universe over here that has the electrons and protons. So if I'm another electron, I'm sitting here, and there's a clump of electrons over here moving, I'm going to notice that this side of the universe has got more energy in it than this side, because this side has lost some of its energy moving electrons. And it's just a simple, simple explanation for what causes gravity. Gravity completely looks like that. It completely looks like you have a system that appears to be at equilibrium. That is, just as much stuff goes in as comes out. But it's not at equilibrium because the energy got used up moving things. And moving things consumes the speed of light. It consumes the speed of the force. And by consuming its speed, you consume its momentum. And a little tiny bit of it is absorbed each time an electron moves. And so that simple explanation satisfies all the functions of gravity. It explains where it comes from, why it exists, and why it's a weak force. because it's a tiny little difference, a tiny little extraction of energy. And it's all in every direction ultimately, because the force hitting the electron is from every direction. So the electron is jiggling in that force. And by jiggling in that force, it's consumed a little bit of the energy that the universe had. It will give back less than it took. Just a fact. A little bit less. Alright, so we'll see how that went. Probably a good idea. I mean, it makes the chalkboard a little bigger, so I'll try to do that with some subjects.
I think it's electrostatic effect, but still, you think that the electron would be strongly attracted to the Earth if the Earth was a positively charged ball, like I think it is. So there still might be something screwed up about my theory that doesn't really account for the fact that gravity doesn't seem to have any effect on electrons.
Right. There's absolutely no reason for us to believe that we could see the effect on an electron, in the sense that the electron is so influenced by all the other changes we make to the energy field around it. A tiny little flashlight is a huge amount of energy from the perspective of an electron. So you got to understand that if you could create a perfect environment where you're not influencing the electron, you're all far enough away looking at it, so you're not close enough to create a charge, but to be radiating a bunch of energy to influence the electron, or changes in energy. Less energy is more energy, in the sense that all we're talking about is imbalances in the field that the electron is existing, and you're going to profoundly imbalance the field based on just how energy reflects off you. So you can't even be in proximity to the electron you're viewing if you're attempting to view it in its native condition. But if we could create an environment where we have no influences on the electron, we're not changing the external environment it sees, it can't see us, so to speak, well, then you'll see the electron fall in gravity. But otherwise, the amount of change in the field you will create is so much larger than the tiny little bit of energy it's absorbing from gravity. It's a tiny object. It only takes a little tiny bit of, it only absorbs the tiniest bit of energy from the system.
So maybe, if that's true, then, maybe gravity doesn't have any effect on, photons. Maybe. But
I think it's silly to think it does. Okay, so just because every other form of energy, magnetism, all the other forces can't interact with force. You can't bend magnetism. You can't bend gravity with gravity. Forces don't influence forces. Forces have to hit matter. And, if that's not one of your axioms, then that's a starting point through which some argument needs to be made about what experiments demonstrate to you that there's any reason to have as a default idea that a force can be influenced by a force. That something moving the speed of light ever influences something moving the speed of light. Because I would argue there's no evidence that it ever took place anywhere else in physics. So why do you think this one circumstance, the force is magical and it's twice as affected? Not only is it affected by gravity, it's affected twice as much. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah, well, there's no point, because, see, I respond to what people throw in there. These trolls make comments, I respond to what they're saying, okay, if they have some sort of argument to make something. But it's all based on lies. And I'll just make a point like I just made. I mean, can you show me any other force that's bent by a force? Can you show me the laser beam bending the laser beam? Can you show me some example of a force bending a force? So aren't we really saying that it's kind of an extraordinary claim to believe that light is bent by gravity, and that you should have extraordinary evidence? And that, at least ordinary evidence? And that the most famous experiment, the Eddington experiment, which is relatively simple, has never been done from space, where the resolution is 400 times better resolution. So the Joker, Mickey Farley, the asshole trolls, okay, I sit there and make this point. They will never respond to the point. You have 400 times better seeing ability from space, and they've never done the experiment. Can you explain that? You don't need an eclipse. It's a simple experiment. You could do it in one day, okay? A few hours of satellite time. the cameras are more than sufficient because you have 400 times better viewing. 400 times. And it's never been done. One of the most famous experiments, the experiment that made Einstein famous, and you haven't redone it with best technology. And I'm supposed to believe that's science that has credibility. That's credible science, even though one of the mantras of science is repeat the experiment. Confirm, 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 confirm. Where's the evidence that you give a shit about any of this confirmation crap? That question will not be answered.
And then he said he started yelling and screaming at the guy who did the experiment.
So again, what I just did is apparently yelling and screaming. So when I plead for you people to be rational, that's yelling and screaming. Okay, so this is the whine, the excuse. These are just disgusting excuses. So these people make accusations, impugning my character, impugning the integrity of the work I've done, insulting it gratuitously, and I get this aggravated, and that's yelling and screaming. I mean, isn't this just such bullshit? This is like some, wife in a divorce court saying he emotionally abused me, because he said, your ass is getting a little fat. Something like that. Yeah, sure, that's fair, cop. No, these are very unfair people.
Which ended up proving his theory wrong. No?
Okay, so again, there was nothing that proved anything wrong. Stephen Bro produced no experiment that proved anything wrong. Okay, so that's just bullshit. Puro never did any experiment that proved anything wrong. There is no evidence that anything I've claimed has been proven anything. So that's just more crap. Some people have made reasonable arguments about, say, the gravitational lensing. I was saying that, it's impossible to create lensing with the wrong shaped lens, but it is possible. It's just, again, kind of a gimmick. You'll say, well, it certainly wouldn't create the lensing they claim to have seen. So it wouldn't create the images they're producing. It would create a kind of lensing, but it wouldn't create the lensing they're showing. But anyway, and I've conceded those points. So this is just all more part of the lie.
Maybe. Once again, he does also understand this problem that nothing that any one dissident will say to another will ever convince them of anything, right?
Well, because they're immune to interaction. I'm just saying you can't interact with a dissident. All right, I've tried. I mean, I've sent emails to Bill Gates. I've sent emails to the Decini guy. I've sent emails to every single one of these people. Okay, encouraging some sort of dialogue, to Franklin Hu, asking him for Skype. I've sent him the messages. Now, he's a little difficult because, he didn't respond to anything. Except for like 2 years later. But whatever. I mean, there's just absolutely no will by any dissident to defend their arguments. Okay, so if you try to get them in a position where they have to defend what they're claiming, there's just it ain't going to happen. They just like to spout shit. They don't like to interact.
You can show them all the experiments in the world. It's like, if I go show Gary...
See, this is where you have no evidence of this, Franklin, and it's just a stinking, lousy, rotten thing to say about somebody else, and you just have no right to say it. Just no right at all.
This experiment where I transmit, like, the triangle or sawtooth wave, and you go look at it, and hey, look, it's a sawtooth wave. He would not say, oh, well, I guess you're right, and it can't just be coming in clumps. You would never, ever do that.
So again, he's claiming if he showed me the evidence, I'd deny its existence. There's absolutely no evidence of that, so you have no right to say it. All right? I'm all interested. I'm sitting here begging people to give me a goddamn link to one fucking demonstration of the two-slit experiment that's rational to the facts, that actually is consistent with the actual facts, where they actually show the real pattern and they actually explain how the real pattern can be created by two waves, which it can't. All right? So I'm pleading for evidence, and people don't produce any of it. So this is just bullshit. I'm very interested in evidence. And on this particular subject, okay, so let's be clear on what the subject is. So Franklin's asserting that there's a difference between radio waves and light. and it's an assertion a couple of these dissidents make. Now, I don't think that's anywhere close to being reasonable. They're all made by the same function. Electrons produce all of it. And you're just changing the frequency and changing the density of it, you could argue, in a way. You know, you can obviously produce a lot of radio photons. Big device, you know, big amount. So anyway, so the idea is that I'm saying the form of a photon is just clumps of energy, and that's what's hitting a surface, is impulses of energy at a frequency, and they're not waves. They're hard bits of momentum, a certain amount of kilovolt, if you want to call it that, a certain amount of kilovolt. It's not a wave. There's no, oh, it's a little bit on, it's a little bit, oh, it's more on. There's no more on for the photon, more on. No, photons don't know anything about this kind of crap, okay? They're clumps. And Feynman would argue this also, okay? It comes in clumps. It doesn't come in waves. It doesn't gradually, I'm gradually turning into a photon. I'm almost, a photon, and then I'm gradually not a photon anymore. I'm gradually a piece of momentum. No, there's no gradual to the momentum. So you can't make, I would argue, in the elemental frequency, the frequency you send from a radio signal, you can't send a shape to the on and off. The radio signal is on and off. It's sending a binary system, okay? This is a digital system. It's sending a digital on, off, on. There's a clump, there's not a clump. Now you can have more, okay? You can increase the amplitude, okay? But increasing the amplitude is putting another feature on top of the frequency, right? So that's AM radio, right? Increase the amplitude of the signal to put a sub-signal on. So I can make another signal, okay, where I'm increasing the amplitude, that is the amount of photons I'm sending, I'm increasing their number. So I have this frequency, which is the carrier, and then I have the sub-frequency, which is the change in the amplitude. So I'm creating two signals. Now this signal you can make look square, or you can make it look like a sawtooth, or you can make this into any shape you want. So this signal you can shape. This signal you can't shape. This comes in one form and one form only, binary. And the same is true for FM, where I'm changing the frequency. So all I can do is change the distance. So subtle changes in the frequency. I'm changing the frequency, okay? Now I can change the frequency by a lot. I can put two little bits far apart, or I can change the frequency by a little, okay, and have them little. So it's two different signals again. The basic argument is that the fact that I'm sending a bit can't change. So now I've standardized the amount of energy, okay, and so that's the part you're sending, the signal, but you can't sawtooth the signal. You can't shape that. All right. That would be the argument. So the carrier can't be shaped. It's made out of on and off, in at least AM radio. Now, you know, the changing the frequency, it's still on off on off on off. So you can't. Yeah, you just don't have you don't have any mechanism to create any shape to the wave. So there is no shape. It's just on-offs. And so if you show me evidence where you can send a carrier, that is the elemental frequency, the 200 megahertz, 500 megahertz, 40 kilohertz, some signal that you can send where the carrier is a shape, I'll concede your point, but you won't be able to do that. You can't shape the carrier.
Say that your experiment is wrong, your experiment is biased, your experiment doesn't mean anything. You would never actually go and say, okay, my theory predicted the wrong thing and this experiment shows that.
Yeah, see, so this assumption that I'm as dishonest as you, you know, maybe that's what you would do. Maybe that's what D. Hilster would do. Okay, I mean, he doesn't want to hear dissenting arguments to his infinity theory and his faster than the speed of light bullshit and all the other bullshit he's thrown into his theory. He doesn't want to hear any of the dissent, but he doesn't want to hear it, and he doesn't respond to it at all, frankly. Because I could make arguments. You can make arguments to regular physics. Again, I've made the argument, okay? It is absolutely silly for any physicist to use the Jungian two-wave thing and say that describes the double slit pattern, because it can't. It can't do it. It will not do it. It can't work, and it's not even consistent with their own math. Let's understand, their own math is conceding the point. Their math, okay, is only interested in the thickness of this slit, and it's the slit width, the surface. That's where the two waves are coming from. The two waves are not coming from the center of this opening and the center of this opening. The Young drawing doesn't produce the right pattern. Okay, it might be within a millimeter or 2 or 3, but it isn't accurate. It's not right, because the real distance is the surface. That's what the math says. All right, and the math, they're saying this is where the wave center is. They've already conceded the point, because their math never puts the wave center in the center of the slit. So clearly they can draw this, but it means nothing, because their own math concedes that's not how they understand it. So, I mean, you can have obvious flaws in theory. I mean, grotesquely obvious ones. And even regular physics doesn't fix it. I mean, it's obviously nonsensical mush. All right? And they don't fix it. I can bring it up, and not a single one of the physicists will say, well, yeah, you're right. That is bullshit. Not a single person has shown up who has a physics degree or is a regular conventional physics believer in. Not a single one has written a comment on one of my videos saying, yeah, you're right, they shouldn't do that. Because that's bullshit. That's not even close to the truth. The 1801 silly drawing by Young is not the double slit pattern. He didn't see the true double slit pattern. The experiment was so crude. It's a freaking a box with holes in it. I mean, it's just a terrible experiment done in sunlight. It has nothing to do with what we know the real pattern does, where it has the envelope. And we know also from the math that the math that works has to acknowledge, if you want to get the big pattern right, you have to use the surfaces as the point sources. And if you want to get the whole pattern right, you use 4 point sources, and the point sources are the surfaces. Now that fact just can't be denied, and yet not a single one, not a single person who's watched these videos, who's a dissenter, who disagrees with me, is willing to concede the simple point that they shouldn't teach it that way, because that's a rubbish theory. That's just junk. Okay, that they're just protecting archaic nonsense that was wrong, and they're just establishing it as a fact and an axiom, and it's just a wrong-headed axiom. It's not correct. So it's you people that are demonstrating you can't accept reality. Do you accept it? Have you watched the video, and do you understand that you really can't deny the truth of what I'm saying? There's no way to turn it into a bad argument because it's perfectly salient. It's perfectly consistent with everything we know. Just as the illustration of gravity I gave you is it explains how it could work. It explains why there's a deficit in the energy when matter moves.
It's wrong. You just never, ever do that. Now, I would kind of hope that if I were presented with...
yes, isn't that precious? So you have absolutely no evidence to convict me of this crime, yet you convicted me of it, and now you're going to pretend that you're immune and you're better. And, oh yeah, I have a better philosophy, and I have more awareness. I'm more... No, Franklin, sorry, no sale. What you did here was crap. You should just fess up. Well, yeah, that was crap. I had no right to say that shit because I have no evidence that Gary denies evidence. You have no evidence.
Evidence like that, someone showed some experiment which showed that there is absolutely no positrons or electrons or Well,
Yeah, there's no positron, so I wish you'd let go of that silly crap. Okay. Again, so another example. The history of the positron is that 10 people did the experiment and saw these things. And one guy said, I'm going to call it a positron. So all the other guys says, it's a fast-moving proton. One guy says, no, I'm going to call it a new thing, a positron. That guy's the inventor. Okay, the other guys did exactly the same experiment, right? They had exactly the same results. They just didn't think there was a new particle. They thought there was that's just a proton doing silly things. So that's the history. I'm just saying that whether there is such a thing, just has to do with the fact that all of a sudden everybody become in love with Dirac's wacky equations, where the same electron can be used 600 million times and bounce all over the universe, and there's no such thing as time or the present or the past or all this other horse shit.
or I think that if you put a positron and electron together, that will form a neutral particle which should be detected, right? So if someone did that experiment and they reacted a whole bunch of positrons, electrons, I'm predicting that the kinetic energy of that, and basically building neutrons, basically,
Yes, so a neutron is a proton and an electron. So why are we messing with positrons? It's just they have no role to play. Where are all these positrons hiding?
you should be able to effectively still detect the resultant particle. If someone actually did the experiment which convincingly showed that there is absolutely nothing left over from the collision, then I would have to say, okay, well, I guess that doesn't work, and my entire theory is out the window. Right? So I would hope that I would do that, but until someone does that, and I assure you, if someone does do that experiment, they will find effectively a neutron being built out of positron electron annihilation.
Yes, there's no annihilation again. These are, they just made up the concept. Why do you believe it? There's no experiment that shows anything being annihilated. There's just nothing. It's all theoretical crap. It's all stuff they do on their blackboards, but it has nothing to do with reality. There's no annihilation. I mean, even Leonard Susskind, okay, the Stanford guru of this horse shit, admits there's no annihilation, okay? We're just really talking about places where essentially there was an electron, the electron's been evacuated, now there's a space that wants an electron, okay? So it's the opposite thing. It's your antiparticle is really the space you leave behind when you move somewhere else. Everything where you used to be is now disturbed by the fact that you're not there anymore. And, it's like you've left a vacancy and something's going to fill the vacancy. But anyway.
I think that someone did that they would find it. But if they did that experiment and we found, nothing, there's, nothing coming out of these reactions, then I'd have to say...
well, if we did these experiments, these are not experiments that we can do. So, again, you're just believing what the accelerator people tell you. You're just believing the story they make up. So they have a result and then they make up a history, right? They have a couple of squiggly lines and they just make up the story. And again, the picture the guy saw, right? So people saw exactly the same thing, so 5 guys, 10 guys, doesn't really matter. Let's just say 5. 5 people saw exactly the same little squiggly line. You have a bar of lead, you got, and this little thing came out and went, well, it went this way, All right, and it's supposed to, the electrons you're watching are all doing this, blah, 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 blah. And something does this, all right? And so every, 5 guys look at it and say, okay, it's just, the proton really should be looking like that. And so it does this instead. And so they're just telling you a different story. The 5 guys say, okay, this is just a proton. One guy says, oh, positron, we're going to invent something new. Okay, because it has too much speed, and it couldn't have that much speed if it went through this lead, and so blah, 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 blah. But that's all there is. There's nothing more to it than that. Just an interpretation of an image, and that's it. One guy interprets it one way, one guy interprets it another way, and that's all this is. And to me, there's no reasoning behind the interpretation. This guy's interpretation was just as valid as this guy's interpretation. But instead we created a new particle. because it fit with what we were wanting to believe, because we wanted something to confirm Dirac's wacky crap about this silly nonsense of a bunch of anti-everything. You know, everything has its doppelganging bullshit.
Never mind. and go on my way and try and redesign my theory to not need that, right? But
yeah, that's exactly what you do, right? You sit there and explain, well, I got to figure out why it does that. So, I mean, the issue of drag came up in my gravity theory. Now, I didn't wish it away. I sat there and I dealt with it and tried to figure out, well, I know it exists. I know electrons and protons don't do what regular matter does in the sense of a wrench. A big matter is able to be thrown in space and it just keeps going. And I know electrons and protons can't do that. I have to have a hydrogen nuclei before I can push it into space and make it keep flying. So I know there's a reason, and you just look for the reasoning. So your theory isn't wrong, it's just that our understanding of the whole mechanism isn't complete.
I don't know. I don't think Gary would. I think that you could present him all the experiments up to yin yang, and he would talk his way out of it.
So you think that based on what? What evidence do you have? Can you show me one shred of evidence you have to make this claim against my character, you fucking scum? I mean, I'm sorry, but I mean, you know, you're a nice guy and all that crap, but what the fuck did that come from? Why the fuck are you making an accusation like that? You're basically saying everything, my whole human integrity, I have no integrity. I'm not searching for the truth. I'm not looking for the right answer. I'm just trying to assert that my God is God. It's not a God theory in the first place, right? It has everything to do with finding the right answer.
What's he saying? So his theory violates the conservation of energy and momentum at every step.
Yeah, so it doesn't do any of that. So again, this is why, you know, they complain that, oh yeah, well, you blocked me. Well, I mean, it's a lie. Okay, you just keep asserting lies. Okay, I have every interest in preserving every notion of conservation. You can't destroy energy. But in the one case, I explained how, well, clearly, if that's the way the thing functions, then energy, in a sense, the force, is weakened by pushing matter. It's just a fact. If the matter moves from one place to another place, energy had to be consumed to do it, and that's just a fact.
And he bans anyone who points it out to him after yelling and screaming at him first.
Yeah, so more bullshit. This is yelling and screaming. Defending yourself is yelling and screaming. Right? I mean, it's just such a fucking lie.
Well, I don't know that that's true. Once again, I think the theory that light is a photon is correct. He just doesn't know what photon is.
Well, it says you. Okay, I've explained it pretty clearly. It's the cause of gravity, magnetism, electricity, and light. Okay, it's all made out of one thing. Force. Bits. I know exactly what it is. You're the ones who are clueless.
And everything that he says that photons do is correct. He just doesn't know what photon really is. It's still a...
I mean, you can't make it any clearer, right? I mean, first I gave you its bits at a distance. And then I gave you polarization. You know, then oh, you didn't see the other shit, right? Because I didn't move this. Well, that's what you missed, this little drawing here. You know, what they saw. Well, anyway, so photon is this. That was what I first gave you. That's what I knew when I was, 11 years old, when I first heard about what a photon was supposed to be. Now, this is what a photon was. Okay, it was never for me, this crap. This crap never fit in my brain. There's no way a photon is this complicated. It's this simple little tiny thing flying off of something. There's just no way it's this, whatever this crap is. It doesn't make any sense. Oh, it somehow knows to go high and go low and go high and go low, whatever the hell that is. It knows how to do that by some magic. No, it doesn't know how to do any of that shit. It's as dumb as they come. It knows how to do one thing. Go until it hits something, and then it hits something, and then it goes and hits something else, and then it goes and hits something else. It can reflect, or it can stick around for a while and push it. That's simple. Well, anyway, I gave you the simple photon. This is a photon, right? So if you get 6 or 9 of these, we see them. You get 4, or a frog might see it. Okay, so who knows? But yes, this is it. This is what has to hit. Something at a period. And I explained to you how this fits perfectly with the idea of a tipping point. The frequency is basically you're saying, how do I tip something over? Well, if I give the thing time to relax and go back to its normal state before I hit it again, I'll never tip it over. I'll never tip it over. I'll never tip it over. But if I hit it fast, while it's still this way, right, I hit it and it moves this way, and then I hit it again, then it tips over. So completely easy to understand. All right, and then I gave you the polarization, okay, that they're a little bit out of alignment, a little bit out of alignment, a little bit out of alignment. I can't see that. All right, well, that's way down there. So they're out of alignment. They're not moving on exactly the same path, okay? And that explains that's a wavelength. And now I explained how, well, if you really take this photon seriously, it's a very big object compared to a single electron. So there's no way a single electron could ever interact with this whole thing called a photon because it's a million times bigger, all right, than the electron. So how the hell is something that has a polarization a million times bigger than the electron going to affect an electron? Yeah, it seems pretty unlikely. I've given you right answers. I've certainly given you reason to doubt their bullshit.
The action that we're seeing with it hitting, affecting electrons, it's absolutely true. But it's because these medium particles are hitting the electron physically, like billiard balls. That is the action that's happening. And last week we talked about, is it?
So it's not exactly like billiard balls in the sense that it's something like it in the sense that if you hit both billiard balls the right way, you can make both of the balls move. You hit the ball and both balls will move towards the direction if you had low speed. And at high speed, one will move and the other one, So obviously the fundamental universe is real hard kinetics. And those rules are, the fact is the balls will stick together as long as nothing's, because they're not depending on rolling. They'll stick together, move together until they hit another force, and that's when everything changes.
Electromagnetic induction? Is it a magnetic field? Is it an electric field? I don't think it's any of those things. I don't think it's any of those things. And we shouldn't believe any of that stuff because it's never really been measured. Clearly.
Field is nonsense, okay? It's a field of something. It's a field of soldiers. It's a field of bullets. It's a field of something. To argue that the field is some magical thing that always exists and you don't have to put players in the field and the field isn't made of something real and you can increase the amount of that field or decrease the amount of soldiers, yeah, that's the real way to look at it. This silly notion that fields just compress in some sort of three-dimensional space, it doesn't make any sense.
Things can be measured in an in-flight radio wave. Like I pointed out, you can detect the nodes in a radio wave. In fact, there's experiments where you take a candy bar and you stick it in a microwave, and because it's a resonant cavity, you can actually see the spots where it melts the chocolate, and you can actually measure the.
Yeah, well, that just has to do with the fact that there's scatter in the box, and there's places where there's not going to be any energy hitting, and there's places, some angles have a lot of places where from the source you can get light to reflect to, and some angles are really bad at the reflecting, but it's really not a phase argument. None of the microwaves are out of phase, doing out of phase interference. That just doesn't happen with microwaves.
The width, and from that you can calculate the speed of light, right? Because you can clearly detect that there is a wave-like nodes in that thing.
Wrong.
So once again, that's another evidence that these things are waves, because you can see.
You can calculate the speed of light based on watching any force because they're all moving the speed of force. So yes, any of them will likely give you opportunity to calculate the speed at which it's moving because there's an emission time and a receiving time.
This direct distance versus energy output relationship, right? It's not BBs that hit everything, right?
One minute he says it is, one minute he says it is. I don't know where he's going.
But I'm sure Gary would just completely deny that and say that that's not.
Yeah, so more just bullshit, right? So fuck you. Show me your experiment. I'll explain how my experiment, my theory, my model explains it. I haven't been shown any experiment that I can't explain. So why, I mean, except, like I said, you wanted me to explain all the black box experiments. Well, forget it. 16 black boxes that do magical things. Well, this is the de-entangler, the de-entangler box, the superimposer box. Bullshit.
Relevant and not actually provide any actual argumentation as to why that's.
Yeah, just such a bullshit thing to say. Like I said, you have no right to say this shit. I don't know why exactly you're saying it. Just cheap and rude. I mean, really fucking rude, Franklin. Frankly, if I got into your room and I said this to you, I said, oh yeah, you'll just deny the evidence. So there's no point in me bringing in any evidence into this room because you're just going to deny it, right? You wouldn't be offended?
Hold on. Let's see. So the Joker's got all kinds of comments here.
Yeah, useless lies. So yeah, go read the useless lies.
Says, I'm aware radio frequency experiment that Stephen Burrows performed, but I'm talking about a different experiment.
So anyway, I'll read the chat because he's obviously skipped over a comment or two. So again, Stephen Bro has produced no evidence of anything. Okay, nothing. He didn't do anything close to showing any distinction between why the pattern isn't created by radio jamming. He did nothing to show any fact that jamming isn't a perfectly satisfactory explanation for the pattern in the radar experiment. Nothing. Because he did exactly what I said don't do. He put an audio tone on the signal and then just detected where he heard the audio tone instead of seeing that there's still microwaves hitting the location. So again.
One that's way simpler to understand and perform. Yeah, I don't know. His theory is so stupid it goes beyond violating conservation and blah, blah, blah. Although alone is enough to make someone a crank, his theory is way worse. Well, you can almost say that about almost any dissident in the world, I guess. That's why we're dissidents.
Well, see, no, they can say it about all of you because your theories don't make any sense. You do violate conservation of energy. You do violate their own principles. And just as I've demonstrated, classic physics violates its own rules. It doesn't do its repeat the experiment thing. It doesn't do find as much corroborating evidence as possible. It makes up stories about experiments it never even performed, like the detector experiments and magical notions that if we're looking at it, it does something, and somehow something could be in a superposition, that is, it's in a place in the universe where nothing is interacting with it, not even gravity. So Schrödinger cat is alive and dead because gravity isn't even interacting with it for some magical reason. Gravity is a measuring device. Newsflash. So the whole time it's in gravity, it can't possibly be in a superposition of two states because it's already been deconstructed into a reality. It's already been forced to be in gravity in this multiverse, in this universe. Okay, so it's already stuck being dead or alive. Not both.
He said if his theory were true, the LIGO experiment would have never worked because the maxima of the laser light would constantly drift by entirely fast throughout the day.
Entire feet. Okay, so he misread that because he's reading it fast. So again, this is so stupid. Entire feet? Where would he possibly get that from? There's absolutely no argument that the LIGO experiment could go entire feet out of alignment. So again, it's such a distortion, such a lie, that he bases this on. And we already know what LIGO is doing. So again, it's sending, a ton of laser light out, okay, and it's getting back 1/billionth of the light it sent, okay, and it's sending it 1,600 times through mirrors. So this is what they've never answered. The question they've never answered is how do you send a beam through 1,600 interactions with a mirror and have any notion that you have a reliable measure of the length of the beam? How could you possibly be getting a reliable length to that photon? And if you use multiple photons, then you're just averaging the noise. But you still have no way of knowing that every time you send a pulse, that it's going to the amount of the photons, how many go through 5 atoms or how many go through 10 atoms before it reflects. You have no way of controlling any of that. So in one beam, in one pulse, this length of how deep it went, it could have gone 7 average in one beam, and the average could be 5 in the other pulse, and the average could be 3 in another pulse. You can't control that average. So again, it's just more horse shit. The experiment has no theoretical balls. And again, I'll ask them again, where in anything Einstein ever wrote did he describe the circumstance where you can convert the mass of an object into bent space waves? Okay, where was that theory ever proposed? This is Kip Thorne's own little imagination. Okay, this isn't anyone else on Earth except for Kip Thorne made up this notion that the only way I can make this force loud enough to get to the Earth is he had to get energy from somewhere. He had to make fake gravity. And this isn't about 2 black holes and how much gravity they're making. No, he had to destroy energy. He had to destroy the matter and create some new form of radiation called bent space. Where is that theory? Where was that tested? Where did anybody argue it? Where was it a conversation? Where's the documentation demonstrating that's a possibility? I can convert matter, electrons and protons, into, okay, bent space. Where? No one's going to answer the question. These liars won't.
Due to the rotation of the Earth. Is that like presuming that it was particles? And that the particles should always head in a straight line? And if the experiment is moving, then...
See, he did really well. He understood completely the concept that, yes, the idea is that light isn't controlled by anything. You can't change it. Once it's on its way in a straight line, and it doesn't move 2 momentums at once. It's not a baseball. You can't throw it this way and have the train push it that way. You can't give it 2 momentums.
All of the beams, all the particles are going to miss the target because we moved that much. Although I assure you, if that were the case, they would have designed the experiment to compensate for that. See, this is the thing about LIGO. LIGO is designed to eliminate every possible other signal source than the thing that they are actually looking for, which is this specific signature.
Yes, but it doesn't. And again, it's never been tested. They've never done a single show you test. They've never done a single one. They didn't, like I said, it's so easy. They just hire a wrecking ball for the day, right? A crane with a wrecking ball, and they just move the wrecking ball back and forth across the tunnel, right above the tunnel. If LIGO is as sensitive as it's supposed to be, it should pick that up with no problem at all. It should be able to pick up every little movement of that big wrecking ball. No problem. They're talking about measuring a change in distance that's less than the width of a proton. It's an insane measurement. We have no device that can measure something this small. This is preposterous science. I mean, the irony is this stupid Sean Carroll guy just did a video on the subject of science, and he's using LIGO as an example of good science, when it's the worst possible example. Completely unconfirmed, unestablished theory, unproven. They merely said we did it, and you're all just saying they did it because they said they did it. There's no real evidence they did anything except heard a fart from deep inside the earth and called it the special magical event.
Of 2 black holes colliding into each other. So they'll take every other signal they can possibly think of, the effect of the moon, the rotation of the earth, the drift of...
Newsflash, there's some sounds that only happen, just like there's some geysers that only erupt once every 10,000 years. Yeah, well, there's some noises the universe only makes once every 10,000 years. And I'm sure they don't have those written in a book somewhere. Oh yeah, that's that. Okay, forget it. No, they don't have a record of that sound. They can't edit it out.
The ether, and just null all of those things out. They don't care whether those things exist. So
So you're sort of off the subject, though, Franklin. The idea is can we reliably measure the length of a photon if we effectively crash it into an object and get a reflection? Is that reflection going to be so precise that we'll be guaranteed on the return path that the photon will be, every single time we do the experiment, the return photon will be coming back at exactly the same time? And there's no expectation that we can do that with a single reflection, let alone 1,600 reflections.
I don't think this is. I'm just saying that this is not a valid argument. That it's like, even if it did drift, it's like they would have compensated for it. It's like, yeah, the Earth moves this much, so we're gonna move our mirror over.
The point is whether or not it actually happens. That this is an experiment that could verify that photons travel in a straight line. Okay, they believe they don't. That's the whole point. They think the photon jumps to where it's supposed to go. It somehow knows the Earth is going to move this much and the galaxy is going to move this much, so I'll jump to the right location. They think somehow the photon knows that it's supposed to jump to the new location. It's supposed to jump to where the target moved to. So I could take the basketball hoop, and the theory is the basketball hoop's going to move over here in the time it takes to launch the basketball. And they actually think that when the basketball flies out of the emitter, that somehow the emitter knew that the hoop was moving away and it threw the basket into the right hoop. That's what they think.
There to make sure it gets it and reflects it back. And
again, it's not even what Einstein thought. So they would disagree with Einstein, and they would say, well, Einstein, your thought experiment is completely wrong, because in the rocket ship, the light actually does shoot to the future. It does know that the side of the ship is moving, and it does shoot up and hits the target. That's what they would tell Einstein, is that you're wrong, Einstein. The light doesn't look like it fell. The light looks like it jumped to the future. So it looks right to the guy inside the ship, because he's the only person that matters, is the guy in the ship. And he can't know how fast he's going. So to stop him from knowing how fast he's going, we're going to pretend the laser beam jumped to the future. It went a longer path in the same amount of time, which is also idiotic.
I don't know if they did.
So presumably, just as in the GPS system, they've included these factors like the Sagnac effect and so on for the Earth's rotation without sort of explicitly admitting it. But I haven't seen that for the LIGO, but presumably they have, as you say, Franklin.
So I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. So I've never heard of GPS even being anywhere near accurate enough to do any of those compensations. So again, this is such bullshit on so many levels. There's not enough speed, for these tiny amounts of difference. There's no way we can measure these, differences. We can just know that it's not accurate, okay? That it's off, but how much it's going to be off by, those predictions aren't made by the math.
I mean, for them to be able to measure the difference in the length of the arms of like less than a width of a proton, which is what they claim to do. I mean, I would claim that I could jump up and down in their visitor center and create a signal bigger than that, pretty much, right? But, they have ways of filtering. And I'm sure when I jump up and down in the visitor center that they actually see something in LIGO.
You say you're sure. They show you nothing. Again, so why do you have any confidence in what they can do when they haven't shown a single piece of evidence of their detector detecting a single thing ever? They haven't even showed us them detecting a wrench falling on the floor. Anything. They show absolutely no tests. Nothing. No demonstrations of the sensitivity of the device.
Right?
And they do that because they know that once they show a test, then somebody's going to ask, well, why don't you do a test for something a little bit closer to what you're looking for? So use a test of something like half a wrench. How small a piece of wrench do I have to drop on the floor before you don't hear it anymore? Because once they do that, then they'll have to admit, oh yeah, we can't detect no fucking proton distance shit. That's just horse shit. Yeah, we're made up. This whole thing is just crap. It's a bunch of theoretical crap. We had to justify spending a few $billion on it. And so we said we did it when, we really didn't do shit. And it's going to be demonstrated over time, right? I mean, they got one of these things in Europe now. They've never had an actual confirmation between the two devices. So the one in America and the one in Europe have never detected the same wave, right? The only thing they did was they said, well, the one in Europe was pointed in the wrong direction and it was in the blind spot. So they said that was a confirmation. And then there's going to be one in Japan. They're never going to get a match from Japan and Europe and America, unless it's going to be something obvious. Okay, in the sense that it's going to be an obvious sound almost. They're going to be tricked by an obvious big sound in the universe.
Not the thing that they're looking for. And they're not looking for things that look like trucks driving in the nearby freeway. They know what that looks like. They get signals.
Well, that was the so-called justification for doubling the budget for erecting 2 stations in remote locations to eliminate any specific disturbance in one.
Yeah, exactly. That's really the only way you can do it. If someone flushes the toilet in the Hanford LIGO, that creates the exact same signal that they're looking for, right? And the only way that they can eliminate that is to make sure that they didn't see that same signal in the Livingston Observatory, spaced by the distance that they think the speed of light travels.
Well, so Franklin seems to understand some of this conceptually, because I think he's actually made arguments that the Hadron Collider just creates a ton of information, so much information that you could find anything in it. You want to find a picture of Donald Trump, you'll find a picture of Donald Trump in that information somewhere. Something looks like, sort of like him. So you can find anything you want, because there's so much data, you can find anything in it.
There's going to be something. So that's the only way you can eliminate the flushing of the toilet in the Hanford facility as being the thing that they're looking for. Right? But I assure you that if there was any other effect, and they would completely ignore things like the NMX effect, the drift, the ether drift. Whatever that is, they're just going to cancel that out, right?
They can't. Again, this notion that they can cancel out stuff they've never heard is ludicrous. So obviously they can't cancel out noises the universe only makes once every 10,000 years. Because we obviously haven't had recording equipment long enough to even know about those noises.
That's not what they're looking for. All they're looking for is their little signal of that they have predicted in their supercomputer.
Yeah, they predicted based on a notion that somehow they converted real mass into a fake field of mush. Not into real energy, but into some sort of bent space, some sort of fake energy. Completely fake energy.
Predictions to be too black.
See, if it was real energy, then they'd have to account for the fact that it would really disturb all the other stuff in the universe around it, so we'd see the product of this gravitational wave creation, because we'd see a bunch of space being evacuated by the fact that a ton of energy just pushed out and pushed everything away. So they had to make it into magical energy that doesn't disturb anything.
Coals colliding into each other, and that's all they're looking for. Because otherwise, billions and billions of noise items come into LIGO probably every second, and they have to throw them all out, right? There's some stories.
You're really believing that somehow there's enough radiation coming off of some source billions of light years away, and there's enough radiation to move the atoms in a mirror. You really think that's happening? In some significant way. A lot more than photons would be able to move. That there's some radiation coming off of those distant objects in the sky that's somehow more energetic than photons. That it produces some sort of energy that's more than photons, right? We know how weak gravity is from the sun, how quickly it runs out. You think the photons from, in deep space, the photons from the sun are a lot more energetic than the gravity the sun's creating.
They're getting this signal, and they found out it was actually a bird pecking away at the insulation on one of the lines.
And actually, these disturbances are probably of a much greater magnitude than the signal they're looking for. So the flushing the toilet is probably orders of magnitude greater than the effect.
You just imagine how many events are taking place even in our own Milky Way galaxy in terms of things moving past each other and other things in gravity, blah, blah, all the little subtle changes taking place all the time, supernovas, blah, blah, blah. And that they can sit there and identify one event in this huge clunk of space, a gigantic chunk of space, and they're going to hear one little sound out of it. Preposterous.
Of the black holes.
Yeah, exactly. It is. It's You walking around the visitor center, you are undoubtedly creating signals that are, probably 1,000.
Well, we did enough LIGO. Let's see if he says something about something else. And then we'll move on.
They're employing the effective Sagnac effect in their calculations, but yet they claimed that it was a relativistic effect. It was allowing for special relativity.
Yeah. Well, this is way too much detail, so no point. Without seeing what the hell you're talking about, there's just no point. So we'll just read some of this crap by the crapheads. So maybe if I jump up here, I didn't read all this extra shit. Alright, so we'll just deal with the Joker's lies. Let's see, it's literally the same as a flat earth. Another example among hundreds is the laser reflectors on the surface of the moon. If the light travels in a God frame, the maximum of these lasers... So he calls it a God frame. So the notion that photons travel in a straight line, he calls a God frame, even though Einstein believed that. And the idea that... that there's real movement in the universe. There are things that are actually moving relative to a point in space. Like a point in space that's not moving, and we could understand the rest of the universe based on that point that's not moving. He's saying that's not possible. I'm saying yes, it's certainly possible. Anyway, but he calls that a God frame. So it's godlike to assume that the universe is empty space and that it doesn't have motion, and that I can create motion in it, but there's no motion in the 3 dimensions until I force something to move in the 3 dimensions. And that I can just place something in space that doesn't move anywhere. Alright. So he says it's literally the same as a flat earth. So yeah, look here. Well, I'll do this one. Okay, an absolute. And by massive conspiracy, I mean like hundreds of thousands of people hiding experimental results. So I've never claimed that ever. I've clearly pointed out what they're doing, which is somebody told them about an experiment and they believe it took place when it didn't. So that's happened. I've shown you them actually talking about 1801 experiments and misinterpreting it entirely. But I've never made any claim that there's any conspiracy to hide anything. Well, I'd say there's some conspiracy in the sense that obviously Veritasium hid the fact, from the public when he made his video, that he couldn't get it to work. He couldn't get the experiment to work with the photo detector turned to a rational volume. So he had to turn it all the way up. So he was creating all kinds of noise photons to get it to work. Now, he hid that fact, didn't he? Just as a fact. Do you believe he hid that fact? Or don't you? I mean, it's a fact he had the photo detector turned way up. You have to concede that point. Did he or did he not tell the public he has the photo detector turned all the way up? All right, results of hundreds of years. Well, so anyway, there's no conspiracy theory. There's a theory that human beings suck, that you lack anything called integrity, and that you will, quote, mine the evidence. And as pointed out by people like Piro, he produces this fake wave picture because he can put noise into a wave tank and it gets noise out. He's saying that's the way it works. Noise is what's, interference creates interference. But then when he draws the 2-slit, there won't be any interference. Creates interference. The standards change. He'll do the experiment one way in the single slit, and he'll do it a completely different way in the double slit. Completely different assumptions. No controls, no rational science involved at all. That's what there is. There's cheating and lying and chicanery, but there's no conspiracy. It's just that a bunch of individuals believe in their religion, and they do Shroud of Turin kind of things. That Jesus was 11 feet tall. They do that kind of crap. All right, another example are the hundreds of laser reflectors on the surface of the moon. Another example among the hundreds is the laser reflectors on the super. So this just shows how ignorant he is, right? If the light traveled in a God frame, the maximum of these lasers would drift enough that you couldn't bounce lasers off. So he doesn't even understand that the laser beam is hundreds of meters across when it hits the moon, and that they don't really have to hit the target. They just hit in the vicinity of the target. So he doesn't even understand how the experiment is actually performed. Because he's an ignorant, lying sack of shit. Okay. Yet another example is the GPS satellites have, so again, more arguments with no evidence. Okay. Satellites have their internal clocks adjusted to account for the effects of general and special relativity. No, they have them adjusted to account for the fact that radioisotopes, decaying isotopes, decay less at velocity. That's the only connection that exists. You can retard the decay of radioactive materials by giving them velocity. That's what they're adjusted for. The clocks do shift. There's no evidence, no hard evidence that they shift by Einstein's formula. And a professional in GPS basically asserts that they don't adjust the clocks based on Einstein's formula. They adjust the clocks by just making them synchronized, by just adjusting them physically until they're in sync. And that's it. They don't do any calculations. If Gary were correct, this would be a conspiracy. So just more lies. I've never denied that GPS works based on atomic clocks and that atomic clocks can be affected by velocity. I've never claimed that clocks aren't broken by velocity. You're claiming the clock isn't broken. You're claiming that you have proof that the clock isn't altered by the velocity. You don't have any such proof, and that makes you the liar. Okay. Involving hundreds and thousands of engineers and scientists who work in these fields. So again, more lies. Okay. He never has to answer these things because he blocks commenters. So just a preposterous lie. I have dealt with your comments. The fact is you're insanely rude. You invade my personal life. Okay, you degrade my security. You make these terrible personal attacks against me. All right, and you overtly lie constantly. And you're saying I should have a respectful conversation with you, you piece of scum? And yet I have given you every benefit of the doubt and given you every opportunity to actually make an argument. I played your video when you made one that was reasonably rational in the sense that it wasn't full of insults. Okay, and I showed it to be a piece of crap. All right, you don't understand the physics and you can't defend against my arguments. And you evade answering any of my questions, any of them. Okay, refuses to debate superhuman dance. So again, a silly argument. Superhuman dance has one argument: unfalsifiability, which is true about every fucking theory offered in physics, just about, is unfalsifiability. None of these things can be seen. None of them can be videotaped. None of them. All right, so all of them have to be deduced by little circumstantial pieces of evidence. There is no way to show up in the courtroom with the DNA, the fingerprints, the photographs. There's no way to build such a proof. So we're all stuck with the fact that the evidence has to be constructed out of what nullifies the probability that the theory is correct. Finding things that don't fit. I have shown you how things don't fit in your two-wave theory. I've shown you how water waves don't produce an interference pattern. How sound waves do not produce an interference pattern, yet a pattern is created in the single slit with light. You have no explanation for these inconsistencies in your own theory. All right, but superhuman dance doesn't know shit. How can you have a debate with somebody who knows nothing about the subject? All right, and Piro, I'm the one who posted on his video to have a Skype conversation. He says I have to do it in something called a Discord. As far as I know, Discord means he has video and I don't, which seems a huge disadvantage right there. But why should I have to sign up to Discord? That's horse shit. Okay. Also, those images, I mean, especially in light of the fact that Skype has an excellent frame rate for video. Okay, also those images of light actually bending around massive galaxies. So again, you claim that's what it is. I claim it doesn't fit mathematically. So why don't you explain why none of them are symmetrical? The math requires there to be symmetry, spherical symmetry for strong gravity. Why aren't they at all symmetrical? Oh, dark matter? Is that what you're going to use, the dark matter excuse? So again, no response to any of these points. He has never explained these images. So another lie. I've explained them that, yes, I think when things blow up, they can create stuff that moves from a center. And that the further away they go, the different masses will mean they'll get kind of bent and crookedy. And that many of the images they're seeing are actually remnants from supernovae and stuff like that. Stuff that blew up. And the stuff just separated slowly through time. And because of the inconsistencies in its mass, it moved at different speeds, and that's why it's wobbly. So I have provided an explanation, and I've also just pointed out the images are in highly processed images. They're not photographs in any sense of the word photograph, okay? They're highly processed data, and that they could have aberrations in them, you know, stuff made by algorithms, stuff made by their software, okay, not stuff made by reality. All right. Back to the conspiracy thing. Okay, Piro. All right, anyway. And those are images of light. So he says it. He knows. Okay. Explain these even when shown directly. So obviously I have explained them. They've always been part of my argument. I've been aware of them for decades, since like Carl Sagan or something. So it's just a lie to tell me I somehow ignored it or pretending they don't exist. I'm asking the relevant questions. There's places we know there is strong gravity. Why is there no lensing in those places? There's tons of places that should be creating these aberrations all over the place. This bent light should be visible in all kinds of locations. How come it's not in those locations? All right. Oh, and he comments the fallacy of unfalsibility, and he commits the fallacy of, so this is the same argument. Again, everything Sean Carroll ever says is unfalsifiable. His whole entire theory of the universe is unfalsifiable. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's just a fact. Okay? So again, falsifiability has nothing to do whether it's the most reasonable explanation of the available explanations. I can't falsify the existence of God. I can only demonstrate where the God doesn't make any sense. Okay, because his paper claims that everything about his theory conforms to current science. So it's a silly statement. I never said anything about everything about my theory conforms to current science. I said it conforms to the evidence. So you can't ever paraphrase correctly. You can't accurately quote. You're just a despicable liar. There's nothing in the evidence that shows any evidence that I'm wrong. There's no experiment that's beyond explanation. Same as his religious fanatic saying evolution works with Bible. Same as religious fanatics saying evolution works with the Bible. So again, just a complete lie. Okay, so just, again, no comparison at all. I'm saying that, yes, the experiments where you're saying photons are entangled because of a polarization gimmick, I'm saying that's a stretch. You're the one stretching the truth. Yeah, we agree he's a lunatic. So again, more crap. And when he draws those force arrows, they're not force arrows like real physics teachers draw. Yeah, because theirs are little wavy things. Okay, he thinks they're physical objects. Yes, it's physics. They're supposed to be physical objects because the subject is physics. Okay, force is a physical particle. Well, it's a physical in the sense that particulate. Yes, it's a thing, okay? Thing that carries momentum. I don't care what you make it out of. Steel, mud, sparkly, fairy dust. It really just doesn't matter what it's made out of. The fact of the matter is it's identifiable. It takes up a certain amount of space. And that's all it needs to do to be something we can call a thing. All right. Not a property of matter, but matter itself. He is confused AF. Well, anyway, I mean, obviously I'm pointing out how you're the one with the confused, inconsistent, irrational theory with which you support with fake evidence. As example, the two-slit experiment. As example, LIGO. who are we talking about? And what? And that's incoherent because those little arrows have properties. So again, I'm pointing out that they don't have many properties. All they do is carry momentum and they move at the speed of light, and that's it. They don't have any properties besides being incredibly small, moving in straight line, and traveling at constant speed. And that's it. That real physicists would call force. So that's a lie right there, right? They don't have any concept of a force. They think it's made out of virtual photons, or the force is made out of a bent space. They have no concept of a force. So more horseshit. So it's circular logic. Well, whatever. That's just horseshit. Good morning, assholes. Charles Lucas Jr. So who the fuck is that? I mean, there's Bill Lucas. Who's this Charles Jr. fellow? And he's a junior? He's Bill Jr.? I don't know. Is Bill shorthand for Charles? I don't think so. I know you're watching. Say something. Yeah, I did watch. Yeah, I don't waste time getting into little chat conversations on the subject of physics. Physics really isn't made for this chatty crap. But here we go. We want to talk about Malcolm. So he brings up my father. You know, he died a couple of years ago. So this is the character of these people. And, you know, Franklin Hu doesn't see any problem with that. You know, assholes who bring up my family and all kinds of other stuff that is none of his fucking goddamn business. It's disgusting, you know, that these people aren't just taken out somewhere and properly disposed of. How come a wave is not a particle? How come a wave is not a particle? It can be made of particles, retard, but a wave is not a particle, you stupid ass. It's going more than one place at the same time, a wave. A wave has components going in different directions. How can one thing go in different directions? It doesn't make any sense. So I won't bother reading that nonsense. They're stupider than the trolls, frankly. Particles are made of solitons. Right, so these are the religious kooks. They call them solitons, you know, like soul, like they have a soul. You know, of electromagnetic fields in perpendicular geometric structures. Well, that says absolutely nothing. Then this asshole, Mickey Farley, the curse of 25 lighters on my dresser. Yes, sir, I gotta get paid. I don't even know what that means. Fucking crazy bastards. Oh, and look, it's bringing up my fucking twin sister. Look at that disgusting fucking behavior. You know, denies evolution? Who's that? Oh, you mean my dead sister? Oh, you're bringing up my dead sister. Boy, you really have some kind of integrity as a human being, don't you? So just understand, these are the people whining that somehow they don't get to interact. You get it? There's people who really don't deserve the right to have an interaction with people, right? You have some sort of right to say, geez, those are fighting words. Why the fuck are you getting in my personal space like that, you fucking cunt? I mean, why the fuck should anybody tolerate this shit? And yet, Franklin Hu will just read this comment like this is a nice person, like this is a regular person. You know, there's no penalty for this horse shit. This horse shit behavior carries no fucking YouTube penalty. It's disgusting. And the assholes, like Stephen Bro, will make heroes out of these assholes. Assholes who play in these fucking kind of games. Stephen Bro types and the mindless marble types, right? Every one of the assholes whining that I blocked them and somehow it was unfair in doing so, every one of those assholes supports this behavior. Every single one of them. So yeah, all these people complaining they got blocked. Yeah, they got blocked for goddamn good reason. Because they're shitty human beings that make shitty arguments. They can't even get close to a fucking truth. But yeah, Franklin, there's nothing harmless about this kind of crap. Okay, so your whole theory that these trolls aren't troublemakers is really fucking stupid. Wait till you have a few. You know, then you'll get it. Alright, so enough of a video. Fuck. Sorry, a little bit of performance issues in terms of not having the window. I didn't put the window back, which I should have done. But it doesn't matter. It really isn't part of the physics. Me being in the picture isn't that essential. Alright, so till the next time and such. But disgusting. Fucking disgusting people on this planet. If we had a real civilization, we just wouldn't let them crawl around like that. You know, we'd treat them like the rest of the bugs.